We're diving deep today into a pretty profound shift. It's happening across global supply chains, maybe a bit quietly, but it's there.
Yeah, and moving fast, particularly in some really critical industries.
Absolutely. And keeping up, understanding these changes, it feels less like an advantage now and more essential, wouldn't you say?
Totally agree.
So our focus today is the CRO and CDMO industry. That's contract research organizations and contract development and manufacturing organizations.
Right. CROs handle the R&D side for new drugs, and CDMOs, well, they actually make them.
Exactly. And we're really zeroing in on India today. It's a region that's going through quite a significant transformation in this sector. It's pretty vital stuff.
It really is.
And look, this whole deep dive, it's built entirely on insights from a very recent Goldman Sachs report.
Okay.
Yeah, it came directly from their second annual India CRO CDMO trip just this June 2025. Pretty substantial effort. They brought together 10 leading Indian companies, plus over 20 global clients.
Wow. Okay. So direct conversations, on-the-ground insights. That's valuable.
That's the idea. So our mission for you listening is to cut through the noise. We want to uncover the key insights, maybe some surprising developments, and definitely the long-term implications of India's changing role here.
Especially, I guess, in the context of China+1 and all these new drug types emerging.
Precisely. So the big question is, what exactly did Goldman Sachs find on this trip? And, what does it all mean for the future of pharma and biotech?
What's genuinely fascinating, I think, is just how quickly the whole global landscape is adapting.
Right.
We're going to explore not just what's changing, but maybe more importantly, why these shifts are so critical, for the whole global healthcare supply chain, and at the end of the day, for you.
Okay, let's start there then. A major driver seems to be this China+1 effect.
Yes, China+1.
So basically, it's a strategy, right? Global pharma and biotech companies looking to diversify their supply chains.
Yeah, the idea is not being solely reliant on China, spreading the risk, building more resilience.
Makes sense.
And the really striking thing from the report isn't just that companies are talking about it. It's that India is seeing real, concrete action.
Okay. Like what?
Well, the report flags a significant influx of inquiries, requests for quotation RFQs, basically asking for project bids. And this isn't just a trickle. It's been ramping up over the past, say, year to 18 months.
And is it just talk, or are things actually moving forward?
That's the key. We're seeing tangible conversions. Companies mentioned, like Syngene, Neuland, Divi's, they're reporting actual movement from those initial RFQs into pilot projects.
Okay.
And even into full-blown contracts. So this diversification, it's genuinely starting to take root.
But I imagine that takes time to show up on the bottom line.
Exactly. The report is clear on that. While conversions are happening, the big financial wins for India, they won't pop up overnight.
Right.
This is more of a long game, a strategic repositioning. It could play out over, say, 3 to 5 years, maybe even longer.
So zooming out a bit, the takeaway is clients are actively building these strategies to reduce their China dependence.
Very much so. And interestingly, it seems the driver isn't necessarily specific policies like the Biosecure Act discussions we've heard about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those discussions were apparently quite light. The strategic push for diversification seems to be the main thing on its own.
Now, there was a nuance in the report about who is moving, wasn't there? Something about company size?
Yeah, that was interesting. Big pharma and the larger biotechs. They seem much more likely to actually switch their supply chains.
Why is that? Just scale.
Pretty much.
Right.
They got the scale, the resources. They can absorb those initial switching costs more easily. It makes them, a bit more agile in that sense.
Right. Makes sense. But what about the smaller players? The smaller biotechs?
That's a critical point. The data suggests they're, much less willing to bite the bullet on switching costs.
Especially now, I guess.
Especially now. The funding environment is still challenging. The report notes U.S. public market funding for healthcare was still below historical averages in early 2025.
So every dollar counts for them.
Absolutely. Disrupting a working supply chain is a tough sell when cash is tight.
So, okay, let's bring it back to India. How are the companies there seeing this play out on the ground? What are they observing?
Well, Neuland Labs, for instance, they mentioned seeing indications at a conference, BOS Basel 2025, innovators wanting to increase their India allocation. They've seen more visits from big pharma, and they actually landed 3 projects from one innovator, specifically moving work out of a large Chinese company.
Wow.
And they found this de-risking move is particularly noticeable in the early development phases.
Interesting. What about others?
Cohance Life Sciences, reported a pretty remarkable twofold increase in RFQs.
Twofold. Wow.
Yeah. They said basically every innovator is either secretly or openly pursuing a China+1 strategy. And that led to them submitting 7 RFPs, requests for proposals, so more detailed plans, to one big pharma client, specifically for reducing China dependence. 5 of those were in phase 3 development, 2 already commercial.
That's significant movement. But is everyone seeing the same thing? Any hesitation?
Well, Piramal Pharma acknowledged clients are trying to reduce geographic concentration. That's clear.
Right.
But they also noted some innovators are hesitant, worried about disrupting established supply chains, especially with the funding uncertainty we mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a balancing act for some.
Got it. Others confirming the trend, though.
Oh, yeah. Neuland Labs confirmed more RFPs, more customer visits tied to this diversification theme.
Okay.
And Life Sciences, they saw commercial projects move post-COVID. But more recently, say the last 8-12 months, they've seen a real shift in sentiment towards moving development work too.
So R&D as well as manufacturing.
Exactly, with Big Pharma apparently leading that charge very meticulously.
And Aerogen Life Sciences.
They saw more China+1 movement from Big Pharma too, especially right at the beginning, the discovery stage. They actually added 5 new Big Pharma clients in just 12 to 18 months.
5 new ones. That really underscores the shift.
It really does. It's tangible.
What about the other side of the coin? China's response.
Also quite telling. The report mentions companies like Wuxi Aptech. Apparently, they used to be maybe 20% more expensive than India for CRO work. Now they're deploying more FTEs, full-time equivalents, basically more people power onto projects.
Which sounds like?
Well, Life Sciences interprets that as basically offering discounts, a clear move to try and keep business in the face of this global reshuffling.
Right. So pulling this together, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to grasp these global economic shifts, understand healthcare innovation?
I think it paints a picture of a gradual, yes, but also a really significant reshuffling. Where medicines get researched, where they get made, it's diversifying.
Yeah, changing the map a bit.
And the bigger picture implication here is the strategic importance of diversifying these critical supply chains. It's not just about cost anymore, is it?
No, it seems like it's much more about resilience now, continuity, especially in, well, a pretty complex global environment.
Exactly.
But India's ambition here, it seems like it's not just about grabbing business that's shifting away from China.
No, not at all.
This whole supply chain reshuffle seems to be creating a huge opportunity for them to sort of leapfrog into the future of medicine, right?
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to a really fascinating part of the story. India's aggressive move into new drug modalities, going way beyond their traditional turf of small molecules.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Because India is historically known for, high-volume generic small molecule drugs.
Right, the basics. Very cost-effectively.
So how does a country manage that kind of leap into really complex, high-tech stuff?
Well, it points to some serious strategic investments, doesn't it? And a real drive to build completely new capabilities.
Definitely. We're seeing huge investments, big partnerships in biologics, for instance.
Right, these complex medicines from living organisms, vaccines, therapeutic proteins. It's the cutting edge.
And Syngene, for example, bought that emergent biosolutions facility in Baltimore for, $37 million US?
Yeah, that sends a pretty clear signal.
And Aurobindo subsidiary, Theranim Bio, they landed that 10-year deal with MSD, Merck, Sharp, and Dome.
Right, for contract manufacturing one of their biologics.
And Theranim is investing heavily, about $110 million US just in phase 1, building these massive bioreactors.
These huge high-tech vacs for growing cells.
Exactly, plus fill and finish. They're aiming for revenues between $125 and $200 million from that deal by 2031. Big ambition.
Huge. And they're not alone. Aerogen's investing $40 million US in a brand new biofacility in Bangalore for clinical manufacturing, started with big reactors, planning for more.
And Zydus bought those Agenus bio-CDMO facilities in the U.S., $75 million, plus potentially another $50 million.
These are all really significant signs. A serious industry-wide push into advanced biologics.
But it's not just biologics, is it? They're diving even deeper into newer modalities.
Absolutely.
Right.
Let's talk antibody-drug conjugates, ADCs.
The smart bombs of medicine, as they're sometimes called.
Yeah, pretty cutting-edge stuff. Delivering potent drugs right to cancer cells using antibodies, trying to minimize harm to healthy tissue.
And companies like Piramal, Cohance, SciLife, DCL, Aerogen, they're all investing in the tech to make these, the bioconjugation bit.
That's right. And Cohance Life Sciences, specifically, seems to have a real edge in one type of ADC, the payload, the drug part, based on something called camptothecin, or CPT.
Okay.
They've spent 16 years developing their method. They think the whole ADC industry will lean more towards these CPT-type payloads because they seem to have a broader therapeutic window.
Meaning more effective, fewer side effects.
Potentially, yeah. And higher clinical success rates seem to back that up.
Yep.
So Cohance is investing heavily a new GMP ADC site in India, $15 million, into a U.S. firm called NJ Bio, plus buying land for a big new U.S. ADC site.
They're clearly betting big on that technology.
They are. And look at Dishman Carbogen Amsys DCL. They're already making $40 million US a year from ADCs.
Wow.
Mostly from one Japanese client, but still it took them a decade of development work to get to commercialization. Shows the long-term potential.
Okay, ADCs. What else? Oligonucleotides. Oligos.
Right. Think of these as tiny genetic messengers. They could potentially interfere with disease processes at a really fundamental level.
Also very cutting edge.
Very. Companies like Cohance, SciLife, Syngene, Neuland are active here. Cohance apparently sees oligos as being, very early stage right now.
Like ADCs were a decade ago.
Exactly, they're a comparison. But they see strong synergies because these oligo compounds can potentially be used as linkers in ADC programs.
Ah, interesting connection. Peptides, too.
Peptides are another area seeing aggressive investment, especially from Divi's and Neuland.
These are like small proteins, right?
Essentially, yeah.
Neat.
They can mimic the body's own signals to treat things. Neuland just announced about a $30 million investment to expand peptide capacity at their Unit 1.
Significantly increasing reactor capacity.
Massively.
Yeah.
And what's really notable is they're building this without firm orders locked in.
Really? Just based on inquiries?
It's just based on strong client interests. They're leveraging their 15-plus years of experience and betting the demand will be there.
Bold move. Okay, one more area mentioned. Complex hospital generics, CHG, and drug-device combinations, DDCs.
Right. Things like pre-filled syringes, auto-injectors, pens, stuff that lets patients self-administer meds.
Okay.
One source is a company focusing here, complex injectables, oral soft gels. And get this, they're expanding their cartridge capacity 5-fold.
5 times? To what?
To about 220 million cartridges in just 18 months.
Why the massive jump?
To tackle the huge demand-supply gap for GLP-1 drugs.
Ah, the diabetes and weight loss drugs.
Exactly. The report suggests the world needs something like 30-35 new API plants and maybe 50-55 new fill-finish plants just for GLP-1s. It's enormous.
Wow. And this move towards self-administration, that's a broader trend.
Definitely. The report highlights big pharma moving decisively that way, which is great news for companies like OneSource that specialize in these end-to-end DDCs.
Right.
They apparently have 10 different platforms, over 20 customers. And interestingly, only 3 of those are GLP-1 related, showing they have broad capability beyond just that one hot area.
So yeah, putting it all together, this really isn't just about moving factories around.
Not at all.
It feels like India is genuinely stepping up in cutting-edge science, becoming a hub for the next generation of medicines, ADCs, oligos, complex biologics.
It's a crucial strategic move, not just for India, but for the whole global pharmaceutical picture. It shows real capability, real ambition to go way beyond their traditional strengths.
Yeah, investing in these advanced areas, it feels very proactive, like they're future-proofing their industry, meeting these evolving global health demands head-on.
Precisely.
But okay, it can't all be smooth sailing, right? While India clearly has incredible strengths, there must be growing pains. The Goldman report did highlight some challenges the industry is facing.
Oh, absolutely. No major transformation like this happens without hurdles.
So what were some of the big ones identified?
Well, perhaps one of the most critical is a relative lack of strong domestic innovation.
Okay. Compared to China, maybe?
Exactly. China saw that sharp pickup post-2015-16. India faces more of a challenge there, partly due to some past difficulties in building up that internal R&D engine.
That's definitely a long-term concern. Anything else? Management styles?
Yeah, connected to that, the report did mention some, let's say, conservative management approaches. Some companies being a bit cautious about building capacity before the orders are signed.
Which can mean missing out when demand suddenly surges, I suppose.
Potentially. Yeah, it's a risk balance. Then there's talent.
Ah, always a big one. What's the issue?
Talent outflow. High attrition, especially for entry-level scientists.
Coach?
Seems like it, yeah. It got significant enough that an industry body, IPSO, was formed specifically to try and streamline hiring practices, maybe reduce some of that churn.
Interesting. And specific skill gaps, too.
Yes. Theranim Bio, for example, openly acknowledged a major challenge, finding enough genetic engineering expertise within India.
Okay, that's very specific.
And Sci Sciences pointed out that India hasn't really attracted expats back home in the same way China managed to, which actually influences their strategy, having labs overseas in the US and UK.
Right, bringing the labs to the talent, in a way.
Sort of, yeah. And finally, just optimizing what they do have. Capacity utilization.
Meaning?
Dishman Carbigan Amsis, DCAL. They noted their utilization rates in India are, lower, maybe 40–45%. Compared to their global facilities. Switzerland hitting 80–85%, Manchester 75–80%. So there's room for improvement in getting the most out of the Indian assets.
Okay, so quite a few challenges, but India isn't just, sitting back and letting this happen.
Not at all. What's really impressive is how companies are tackling these head-on with pretty smart long-term strategies and leveraging their advantages.
Like cost.
Absolutely. Theranim Bio highlighted that again. Conversion costs, turning raw materials into finished drugs, roughly 60% lower than China or Korea. That's huge.
60%? Wow. And building costs, too.
CapEx, yeah. Also substantially lower. We're talking maybe 9 or 10 times less than building in the West.
Okay.
And about half the cost compared to China.
A lot of that comes down to efficient local fabrication services for building the plants. It's a massive economic lever for them.
So they're leaning into that cost advantage. What about other strategies, models of operating?
Well, with Life Sciences using these hybrid models we touched on, strategically placing exploratory biolabs in the U.S., a chemistry lab in Manchester.
Right, to be closer to biotech clients.
Exactly, while still doing the bulk of the manufacturing back in India, where it's more cost-effective. Best of both worlds, potentially.
Smart. And focusing on specific customer types. Neuland Labs is doing that, focusing on working with biotechs because they often need more flexibility, more agility, but they're also carefully building relationships with big pharma at the same time, thinking about potential future acquisitions of those biotechs by the larger players.
Playing the long game there?
Very much a long game play.
And we're also seeing just a strong focus on proactive investment, building for growth.
Definitely. Syngene is really pushing growth under their new management, investing in capacity ahead of demand to avoid having to turn down opportunities.
And they doubled their business development team.
Doubled their BD team in the last 2 years, yeah. Setting a clear signal.
Any others being aggressive?
Loris Labs is another one. They're aiming to aggressively invest, double their overall gross, block their total assets, basically over the next 5 or 6 years.
Wow. How? M&A?
Interestingly, no. They apparently don't believe in M&A right now, think valuations aren't attractive. So they're focusing on organic growth, planning significant investments in areas like animal health and crop health, CDMO too.
Okay, broadening their scope.
Yeah, strategic diversification within their own business.
This really shows a maturing industry, doesn't it?
I think so.
It's not just about what you can offer anymore. It's about how you strategically tackle your weaknesses, attract the right people, stay competitive.
Exactly. And the big question now is, how quickly can these strategies really start to offset those challenges we talked about, the talent drain, the domestic innovation gap?
Yeah, it speaks to that long-term vision again. Not just small fixes, but fundamental shifts in how they operate and plan.
Right.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about the money. The financial pulse, the future trajectory for this industry in India.
Always important.
We know the China+1 theme is moving forward, but the report said the big financial benefits might take several years.
Right, and biotech funding is still volatile. Syngene and Piramal both noted that U.S. public market funding is still lagging historical averages. That impacts decisions.
But despite that volatility, there was a positive sign about India's market share.
Yes, a key point. India's relative share of API exports, active pharmaceutical ingredients, has actually stayed above its long-term average for the past 3 years or so.
Okay, so even with funding ups and downs, their fundamental position in the global supply chain seems solid, maybe even growing.
That's what it suggests, a kind of foundational stability.
Now, looking at specific company outlooks from the report, there seemed to be a mix, but some really ambitious growth targets stood out.
Absolutely. While some, like Syngene, expect maybe a more gradual recovery in certain segments.
Like their discovery business may be low teens growth in FY26.
Right. Others like Piramal Pharma and Cohance Life Sciences are projecting really aggressive growth.
Piramal aiming to double CDMO revenues by 2030.
Yeah, and with those key new modalities, ADCs, HPAPI is growing even faster. They're aiming to triple their EBITDA by 2032.
And Cohance.
They aspire to triple revenues by 2030, hit $1 billion. Mostly organic growth, maybe a third from acquisitions.
Huge numbers. Anyone else showing that kind of trajectory?
One source also had impressive projections. Over 30% CAGR compound annual growth rate forecast between FY25 and FY28.
Driven by that demand for drug-device combinations we discussed.
Exactly. So yes, biotech funding is choppy, but the strategic bets these companies are making, they're clearly expected to pay off significantly for specific players in the coming years.
Okay. So let's bring it back to the listener. What does all this mean for you?
Well, behind all the headlines and company names, there's this really fascinating, complex dance going on in the global pharma world.
Yeah, driven by strategy, by innovation, by a very long-term view.
And the upshot seems to be a more diversified global drug supply chain, potentially more resilient too.
Which could eventually impact things like the availability of new medicines, maybe even the cost.
Potentially, yes. And this whole deep dive really highlights how these massive industry shifts, China+1, the rise of new modalities, they don't just happen overnight, do they?
No, definitely not.
They're the result of very deliberate investments, strategic partnerships, constantly adapting to what the world needs and what competitors are doing.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key takeaways. We've seen real, tangible progress on the China+1 strategy. Indian companies aren't just getting inquiries, they're winning projects, diversifying those global supply lines.
Right. And we explored India's really strong push into biologics and these exciting new modalities like ADCs and Oligos, a clear shift towards more cutting-edge science.
Definitely. And crucially, we looked at how the industry is actively tackling its challenges, talent, investment caution, while setting really ambitious goals for future growth.
Yeah, so hopefully this deep dive has given you a bit of a shortcut to understanding a pretty critical and rapidly evolving piece of the global economy.
Some real insights into the forces reshaping how medicines are researched, developed, and actually made.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. As these global supply chains keep reconfiguring, think about how these shifts in pharma manufacturing might do more than just impact drug access and cost.
Okay. Could they fundamentally reshape the future of medical innovation itself? Maybe even open doors to therapies that just weren't economically feasible to develop or produce before this realignment? Something to consider.